Move to economy car 8 now! This valid ticket is for 2A.
Obey the order or leave.
Take this and handle her. You are delaying this entire flight!
We all saw that envelope.
I am freezing this contract today.
Tell us what must change.
Prove every passenger deserves equal.
The woman in seat 2A had a valid first-class ticket, but the flight attendant looked at her as if she had stolen it. Danielle Brooks felt the cabin go quiet around her. Not completely quiet. The engine still summed beneath the floor. Overhead bins clicked shut. A child cried somewhere near the back of the plane. But in the first-class cabin, the soft conversations had stopped. People were listening. Danielle remained seated beside the window, one hand resting on her leather briefcase. She was 44 years old, with calm brown eyes and a face that rarely revealed more than she intended. Her charcoal suit was simple but perfectly tailored. No flashy jewelry, no designer logo, only a narrow silver watch and a wedding ring she still wore 3 years after her husband's death. She had boarded early, found seat 2A, and placed her coat in the overhead compartment. Everything had been ordinary until Margaret Whitmore arrived. Margaret stood in the aisle now, blocking the light from the cabin windows. She was 57, tall, carefully dressed, and wrapped in a cream cashmere coat that looked too expensive to touch. Her silver blonde hair was shaped into a flawless shoulder-length style. A gold bracelet flashed as she pointed toward Danielle. "You're in my seat," Margaret said. Her voice was not loud yet. It carried the colder force of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Danielle glanced at the boarding pass in her hand. "Seat 2A, she said. "That is what my ticket says." Margaret did not look at the ticket. She looked at Danielle. Her eyes moved from Danielle's face to her suit, then to the briefcase near her feet. The inspection that lasted only a second, but Danielle understood it immediately. She had seen that look in hotel lobbies, private clubs, and boardrooms. It was the look people gave when they had already decided who belonged before hearing a single fact. "There must be a mistake," Margaret replied. "I always sit here." Danielle looked toward the aisle. Across from her, seat 2C was empty. Margaret's boarding pass was folded tightly in her hand. "What seat is printed on your ticket?" Danielle asked. Margaret's mouth tightened. "That is not the point. It seems like the only point." A man in the row behind them lowered his newspaper. Another passenger removed one earbud. The tension spread through the cabin like a draft. Margaret leaned closer. "I have been flying with this airline for more than 20 years. The staff knows seat." I requested seat. Danielle heard the message beneath the words "history here. I have status here." "You do not." She had spent most of the morning reviewing a confidential proposal on her laptop. In less than 6 hours, she was expected in a meeting that could determine the future of Crestview Airlines. Her company, Brooks Dynamics, had designed a new passenger security and data platform that the airline desperately needed. The agreement was worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Only a handful of executives knew Danielle was the founder and chief executive officer. To everyone else on the aircraft, she was simply a black woman sitting alone in first class. She preferred it that way. Power revealed very little about a person. The way they treated someone they believed had no power revealed everything. Margaret pressed the call button above the seat. A soft chime sounded. Seconds later, Susan Miller approached from the front galley. Susan was the lead flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with auburn hair pinned neatly behind her head. Her professional smile appeared before she reached them, but it faded when she saw Margaret. "Mrs. Whitmore," Susan said warmly. "Is everything all right?" Margaret turned toward her with visible relief. "No, it is not. Someone has been placed in my seat."
Yeah.
Susan looked at Danielle. "Not at Margaret's boarding pass? Not at the empty seat? Your ticket, Mom? May I see your ticket, Mom?" Danielle handed it over. Susan studied the boarding pass. Her eyes paused on the seat assignment. One brief moment, and uncertainty crossed her seat. Uncertainty crossed her face. "This appears to be valid," Susan said. "It is valid," Danielle replied. Margaret released an irritated breath. "I told you I requested this seat. I cannot sit on the aisle, you know that." Susan turned slightly toward her. "Of course, Misses the exchange, soft voice, the familiar smile, the immediate respect. Then Susan's face changed, and her expression changed. It became careful, controlled, almost apologetic, but not fair. Miss Brooks, would you be willing to move to another seat so we can resolve this quickly? Danielle looked at the empty seat across the aisle. Is that seat in first class? Susan hesitated. We may have an available seat farther back. How far back? Another pause. Economy. The word landed heavily. Danielle stared at her. You are asking me to leave a first-class seat that I paid for because another passenger prefers it. Susan lowered her voice. I am asking you to help us avoid a delay. Danielle felt something tighten in her chest. Not rage. Something older. A familiar exhaustion. The burden was always placed on the person being treated unfairly. Stay calm. Be uncomfortable. Do not make others uncomfortable. Accept us to listen for humiliation. Danielle took back her boarding pass and placed it carefully on her lap. No, she said. Margaret's eyes widened. Susan's shoulders stiffened. CSET will not move from the seat. Assigned to me. I will. For the first time, Margaret raised her voice. This is unbelievable. The man behind them folded his newspaper completely. Susan glanced toward the open cabin door, then back at Danielle. Miss Brooks, I need you to cooperate. Danielle's breathing slowed. Her hands remained still. Her voice stayed even. I am cooperating with the ticket your airline issued. Susan's jaw tightened, and in that moment, Danielle knew the situation was no longer about a seat. It was about who was expected to surrender, who was allowed to demand, and whose dignity the airline believed was easiest to sacrifice. Susan held Danielle's gaze for several seconds, as if waiting for hesitation to appear. It did not. Around them, the first-class cabin seemed to shrink. The aisle was narrow, the overhead lights were too bright. Every small sound became sharper. A seatbelt buckle clicked. Ice shifted inside a glass. Somewhere near the front galleys, a metal drawer slammed shut. Margaret folded her arms. This should not be this difficult, she said. I was promised that seat. Susan turned to her at once. I understand, Mrs. Whitmore. Then she looked back at Danielle. Miss Brooks, I am trying to find a reasonable solution. Danielle's expression remained calm, but her pulse had begun to climb. A reasonable solution would be to honor the boarding pass. Susan's lips pressed into a thin line. You are making this harder than it needs to be. The accusation was quiet, that made it worse. Danielle had heard that kind of sentence before. It was often used when someone wanted obedience without admitting they were wrong. It shifted the blame. It made resistance look like aggression. She glanced at Margaret's hand. May I see her boarding pass? Margaret pulled it closer to her chest. That is private. Danielle looked at Susan. You checked mine. Susan gave a small sigh. Mrs. Whitmore is a long-standing customer. That does not answer my question. The man in the row behind them leaned forward slightly. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and wire-framed glasses. His newspaper rested open across his knees, forgotten. She is right, he said. Susan turned. Sir, please allow us to handle this. I am allowing you. I am also watching how you handle it. Mark's face hardened. Margaret's face hardened. This has nothing to do with you. The man met her eyes. It became everyone's business when you decided to hold up boarding over a seat that is not yours. A murmur moved through the cabin. Margaret looked around, suddenly aware that the room was no longer automatically on her side. Susan's posture grew more rigid. Sir, I need you to remain seated. I am seated. The reply was simple, controlled. It drew a few quiet nods from nearby passengers. Danielle noticed Susan's breathing change. Faster now, shallow. She was no longer just trying to solve a seating dispute. She was trying to restore authority. That difference mattered. Susan lifted the handset near the galley wall. Jason, please come forward. Less than a minute later, younger flight attendant stepped into cabin. Jason Reed, fatigued, clean-shaven, and moving with the quick confidence of someone who believed the uniform settled every argument before it began. He looked first at Susan. That's Margaret. Then Danielle. What is going on? Susan lowered her voice, but not enough to keep others from hearing. She is refusing to move. Danielle turned toward her. That is not an accurate description. Jason looked at the boarding pass on Danielle's lap. Yes. He picked up the ticket without asking. Danielle's hand tightened for a moment, then released. Jason studied it, his brow furrowed. Where did you get this? The question was so blunt that even Susan glanced at him. Danielle stared at Jason, from the airline that issued it. I mean, did you purchase it yourself? Silence fell again. Margaret looked away, but a faint satisfaction touched the corner of her mouth. Danielle felt heat rise behind her ribs. She had negotiated contracts across 3 continents. She had testified before federal committees. She had sat across from executives who underestimated her until the numbers appeared on the screen. But this was different. This was smaller and somehow more personal. "Why are you asking me that?" she said. Jason shifted his weight. "We have seen seat assignment errors before." "Then verify the system." "No," Danielle said. "You are trying to find a reason my ticket should count?" The older man behind her lowered his newspaper to the floor. Jason's jaw tightened. "Mom, I need you to keep your voice down." Danielle had not raised it. That fact hung between them. A woman across the aisle, perhaps in her early 70s, looked up from her purse. "She is speaking more quietly than you are," the woman said. "Jason identification?" Danielle reached into her handbag and removed her driver's license. She handed it over. "Jason Persetem Brooks. The Sissimus Tem seat. The same name on the ticket, Pesterekers. The same seat." His eyes stayed on the card a second longer than necessary. Then he handed it back. "Well?" Danielle asked. Jason looked at Susan. The documents match. "Do not care," released a sharp breath. What the system says." I chose that seat months ago." Danielle turned toward her. "And yet your ticket is not for this seat." But Tacty face flushed. "No, but I know exactly who you think I am." The words struck harder than Margaret struck harder than a shout. Susan's stepped between them. "That is enough." Danielle looked up at her. "Enough from whom?" Susan paused. It was a small pause, barely noticeable, but everyone noticed it. Because the answer was obvious. Not Margaret, not Jason, always Danielle. Susan lowered her voice again. "Miss Brooks, I'm offering you a travel voucher, a full refund of the fare difference, and an upgraded seat on your next flight." Danielle's eyes narrowed. "So now you admit there is a fare difference." Susan's face went still. Margaret stared at her. Jason looked toward the galley. The airline had finally said the quiet part out loud. Danielle had paid for first class. They knew it. They were still asking her to give it away. Danielle slowly placed her identification back into her handbag. "I do not want a voucher." Susan's expression hardened. "Then what do you want?" Danielle looked at the seat number beside the window, then at the passengers watching, then back at Susan. "I want the same thing every customer should receive." Her voice was low, steady. "To be treated as though my rights do not become negotiable. The moment someone wealthier becomes uncomfortable." No one moved. The words settled over the cabin with a weight no policy manual could erase. Jason broke the silence first. "If you continue refusing crew instructions, this may become a security matter." Danielle looked at him carefully. "Are you giving me a lawful safety instruction?" Jason hesitated. "That is not what I said." "Then say exactly what you mean." His face reddened. Susan stepped closer. "If necessary, we will involve the captain." Danielle nodded once. "Please do." Margaret gave a cold laugh. "You are going to regret making a scene." Danielle turned toward her. For the first time, there was something sharper in her eyes. "I am not the one making it." At that exact moment, Danielle's phone vibrated inside her handbag. A message flashed across the screen. Board briefing moved up. "Chairman wants your final approval before departure." Danielle read it once, then locked the screen. No one else saw the name of the company. No one understood why her calm returned so completely. But Susan saw the change, so did Jason. Danielle was no longer simply defending a seat. She was watching them reveal themselves, and they had no idea who was taking notes. Jason kept his eyes on Danielle as if patience alone might force her to surrender. It did not. The cabin door was still open. Ground crew moved beyond it in bright safety vests. A baggage cart rattled across the pin outside. Inside the aircraft, the air had grown warm and heavy. Passengers shifted in their seats, but no one returned to their conversations. Susan glanced at her watch. "We are approaching our departure window," she said. "This needs to be resolved now." Danielle rested both hands on the armrests. "It has already been resolved. My name matches the reservation. My identification matches the ticket. The seat assignment is clear." Jason stepped closer. "You were asked to move by the lead flight attendant. I was asked to surrender something I legally purchased. That is still a crew instruction. Danielle studied his face. He was trying to sound certain, but his eyes moved towards Susan after every sentence. He knew the difference between a safety command and a customer service request. He simply hoped no one else did. The older man to Danielle leaned forward. Federal law does not give a flight or crew unlimited authority over every disagreement, he said. Jason turned sharply. Sir, I have already asked you not to interfere. I practice civil litigation for 37 yard. I practice civil litigations 37. Susan's expression, I am listening. Susan's expression changed. Only slightly. But the word litigation had reached her. Margaret noticed it too. Oh, for heaven's sake, she said. Now everyone is a No, Michael looked at her over the rim of his glasses. No. But everyone can recognize when one passenger is being treated differently from another. Margaret gripped the handle of her handbag. You have no idea what arrangement I made with this airline. Then show your boarding to the aisle, Michael said. Her face tightened. Susan stepped into the aisle between them. This conversation is over. Danielle looked up at her, then returned Mrs. Whitmore to her assigned seat. Susan did not answer. That silence exposed more than any confession could have. Across the salon, the elderly earlier slowly reached for her phone. She did not raise it yet. She simply held it in her lap. Camera facing outward. Jason noticed. Mom, recording crew members may violate airline policy. The woman's gray eyebrows lifted. My name is Helen Mercer. I am sitting in a public cabin on a commercial aircraft. I have not been told to stop recording for a safety reason, then closed it. Danielle saw the face beneath his irritation. Not fear of Dane's, fear of evidence. Susan lowered her voice. Ms. Brooks, there is another option. We may be able to place you on the next flight in first class. My meeting is today. We can provide hotel accommodation if necessary. I live in Chicago. I do not need a hotel. Susan's face reddened. Margaret gave a snake on lip shake of her head. This is absurd. Just remove her. Too quickly, words came out quickly. For the first time, Susan looked uncomfortable with Margaret's tone. She glanced at the passengers around them. Several were now calmly watching. One man held his phone near his chest. A woman near the bulkhead had stopped typing on her laptop. Danielle felt the full weight of the moment. If she gave in, the flight would leave. The cabin would relax. Margaret would take the seat. Susan and Jason's would tell themselves they had prevented a delay, and the next person in Danielle's position would face the same quiet pressure. That was how unfair systems survived. Not through one dramatic act, but through hundreds of small surrenders that no one wanted to challenge. Miss Danielle's voice softened. Ms. Miller, I know this is uncomfortable. Susan blinked, surprised by the compassion in her tone. Danielle continued, but discomfort is not an emergency. A wealthy customer being disappointed is not a safety threat. You still have time to correct this. For a second, something human appeared in Susan's eyes. Doubt, perhaps even shame. Then Margaret spoke. Susan, I have supported this airline for years. I have brought corporate accounts to Crestview. I know people in your executive office. The doubt disappeared. Susan straightened. Jason, contact the captain. Jason nodded and walked toward the cockpit. The sound of his shoes striking the galley floor felt final. Danielle watched him go. Margaret exhaled with satisfaction and placed one hand on the top of Danielle's seat. You should have accepted the voucher. Danielle turned her head slowly. Please remove your hand. Margaret did not move. Danielle's eyes dropped to the pale fingers gripping the leather. Remove your hand from my seat. Her voice remained controlled, but the words carried across the cabin. Margaret pulled back. Only then did Danielle notice Susan watching her more carefully. Not as a passenger now, as a problem that refused to fit the story they had created. Susan leaned. Ten arrives, I suggest you follow his instructions. Danielle nodded. If his instructions concern safety, I will. And if he orders you off the aircraft? Then I will ask him to explain the law. It's a lawful basis for that decisions. You are being confrontational. No, Danielle said.
I am being precise.
Helen raised her phone. The camera's lem was recording light. Mom, put that away. Helen's hand trembled slightly, but she did not lower it. I watched my husband lose his job in 1974 because he spoke up for a black co-worker, she said. People told him to stay out of it. He never regretted what he did. The cabins became still. Helen looked at Danielle. Sometimes silence costs more than speaking. Danielle felt the words settle somewhere deep inside her. Her husband had once told her something similar. He had said dignity was not pride. Dignity was the quiet knowledge that no one had the right to reduce another human being for their own convenience. The cockpit door opened. Jason stepped out first. Behind him came Captain Thomas Caldwell. He was tall, broad through the shoulders, with silvered hair and the controlled expression by the interruption. He did not look at the tickets. He did not ask who had been assigned which seat. He looked directly at Danielle. Mama said, I understand you are refusing to follow crew instructions. Danielle rose slowly from her seat. Not to surrender, to meet him at eye level. My name is Danielle Brooks, she said, and before you make a decision, I suggest you ask your crew one simple question. Thomas frowned. What question? Danielle held up her boarding pass. Who does seat 2A legally belong to? No one spoke. The engines hummed beneath them. The phones kept recording, and Captain Thomas Caldwell realized that every person in the cabin was waiting to see whether he wanted the truth or merely obedience. Captain Caldwell looked at the boarding pass in Danielle's hand, but he did not take it. His eyes moved to Susan instead. Is there another seat available? Susan hesitated. There is an open seat in economy. Danielle felt the answer settle over the cabin like smoke. Thomas gave a short nod, as if the matter had already been solved. Then move her there. Michael Foster leaned forward. Captain, her ticket is for this seat. Thomas turned toward him. Sir, I am addressing the passenger involved. You are avoiding the fact involved. The captain's face hardened. I need everyone to remain calm. No one had raised their voice except Margaret. No one had refused to show a boarding pass except Margaret. I success. Yet Thomas kept looking at Danielle. Danielle's noticed it. So did Helen. So did every passenger holding a phone. Thomas stepped closer. Ms. Brooks, my crew has made a reasonable request. I need you to cooperate so we can depart. Danielle kept her shoulders level. What is the safety reason for moving me? This is an operational decision. Based on what? I do not have to debate internal procedures with a passenger. You do if you are using them to remove a paying customer from an assigned seat. A muscle moved in his jaw. Behind him, Jason crossed his arms. Susan stood near the galley with her fingers pressed together. Margaret remained beside the aisle, chin lifted, waiting for the authorities she had called into the room to finish the job. Thomas lowered his voice. Let me speak clear. You can move voluntarily, or I can have you removed from the aircraft. The cabin changed. The threat was no longer hidden behind polite words. It was direct now. Helen's phone trembled in her hand. Michael sat upright. Danielle felt her heart strike, once hard against her chest. She knew airline crews had broad authority to protect safety. She also knew that authority was often misunderstood by passengers and sometimes misused of employees. A captain could order someone off a plane. That did not make every reason lawful, fair, or free from consequences. She looked at Thomas. You have not asked to see Margaret's ticket. The captain frowned. Mrs. Whitmore is not the refusing instructions. Shite is the person claiming my seat. That is no longer the issue. It has always been the issue. Margaret gave an impatient laugh. This woman is impossible. Danielle turned toward hers. Do you have CS2A on your boarding pass? Margaret's eyes flashed. I told you I request. That is not what I asked. Susan moved quickly. Mrs. Whitmore, please let us handle this. Danielle looked at Susan. You keep protecting her from one simple question. Susan's face grew pale. The accusation was not loud. It did not need to be. Thomas held out his hand. Your boarding pass. Danielle gave it to him. He examined the name, flight number, and seat assignment. His eyes stayed on the printed 2A. For the first time, a crack appeared in his confidence. He knew she was right, but admitting it now would mean confronting his own crew in front of the cabin. It would mean telling Margaret no. It would mean acknowledging that he had entered the situation with a conclusion before gathering the facts. Some people feared being wrong less than they feared being seen correcting themselves. Thomas still asking you to move. Danielle's breast stared at him. Then say why. He drew a breath because the situation has become disruptive. Who made it disruptive? You are challenging the crew in front of other passengers. I am asking you to honor a conservation. You are delaying departure. I was quietly before Mrs. Whitmore demanded my seat. Thomas's voice sharpened. This is not a courtroom, Michael answered from behind her. No, in a courtroom, the evidence would matter. Jason stepped toward him. Sir, that is enough. Michael looked at the younger man. I spent most of my life teaching clients that authority deserves respect when authority acts responsibly. Respect is not blind submission. A few passengers murmured in agreement. Thomas looked around the cabin. The phones bothered him now. They were silent witnesses. They made every word permanent. He turned to Susan. Close the cabin door until this is resolved. Susan looked startled. We still have ground personnel on board. Then clear them. The command sent movement through the galley. A catering employee pulled a cart toward the exit. A gate agent stepped into the doorway, confused by the delay. Danielle's phone vibrated again. This time the screen lit clearly in her hand, urgent. Crestview chairman requesting confirmation. Board members assembled. Thomas glanced at it. Only for a second, Danielle locked the screen. Are you traveling for business, he asked. The question came with a different tone. Not respect, curiosity, perhaps calculation. That has nothing to do with my seat. Thomas watched her more closely. Margaret noticed the shift and stepped forward. Captain, I have an important medical foundation dinner tonight. I cannot be delayed because she wants attention. Danielle turned toward her. You have described my presence as theft, disruption, and attention-seeking. You still have not shown anyone that the seat belongs to you. Margaret's face flushed deep red. I do not have to explain myself to you. No, Danielle said. But you do not get to take from me what you cannot prove yours is. The words carried beyond the cabin. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then Susan's voice came quietly. Mrs. Whitmore, may I see your boarding pass? Margaret looked at her as if she had been betrayed. You know who I am. Susan swallowed. Please. The mask slipped. Margaret opened her handbag with sharp, angry movements. She searched through a wallet, a folded itinerary, and several envelopes. Finally, she pulled out the boarding pass and held it between two fingers. Susan took it. Across the aisle, to see across the aisle. The seat had been empty the entire time. Helen let out a slow breath. Michael shook his head. Jason looked away. Thomas stared at the ticket, then at the open seat less than 4 feet from Danielle. There was no booking error, no duplicate assignment, no operational conflict. Only preference, only pressure, only the belief that Danielle would be easier to move. Margaret snatched the ticket back. I requested the window. Someone at reservations made a mistake. Thomas looked at Susan. Was a window seat guaranteed? Susan's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Danielle watched them all. Each of them now had a chance to stop, a chance to admit what had happened, a chance to choose decency over pride. She wanted them to take it, not because she was weak, because accountability without the possibility of correction became punishment, and she had never believed people should be denied the chance to do better. She looked at Thomas. You have the facts now. His eyes moved from Danielle to Margaret, then to the passengers recording him. For one moment, it seemed he might make the right decision. Then Margaret leaned close and whispered something into Susan's ear. Susan's eyes widened. Thomas saw it. What did she say? Susan stepped back. Nothing. Margaret closed her handbag, but as she did, a thick white envelope slipped from inside and landed near Susan's shoe. Susan bent quickly to pick it up, too quickly. Helen's camera captured everything. So did the man near the bulkhead. Danielle saw Susan's hand close around the envelope. She saw Margaret's warning stare, and she understood that this had just become something more serious than entitlement. Thomas looked at the envelope. What is that? Susan froze. The engines continued to hum. The cabin held its breath. And for the first time since the confrontation began, fear appeared on Margaret Whitmore's face. Susan remained bent near the aisle, the white envelope trapped between her fingers. What is inside? Margaret answered before Susan could speak. It belongs to me. Her voice came too fast. Too sharp. Thomas turned toward her. Then why was Miss Miller picking it up? Margaret straightened her coat. Because it fell near her foot. Susan rose slowly. The end seemed focused on it, but the entire cabin seemed focused on it. Danielle watched Susan's face. The color had drained from her cheeks. Her eyes moved from Margaret to Thomas, then toward the passengers holding their phones. She was not.
Was right.
What could still be denied? It is only a thank you card, Susan said. Helen Mercer kept recording. A thank you card for what? she asked. Jason stepped toward her. Mom, stop questioning the crew. Helen did not lower the phone. I asked a passenger a question. Margaret pointed at her. You have no permission to record me. Helen's hand shook, but her voice remained clear. I am not entering your home. I am documenting what is happening in front of me. Thomas raised one palm. Everyone needs to stop talking. The cabin fell quiet again. He looked at Susan. Give me the envelope. Susan held it against her side. It is personal. His eyes narrowed. You are on duty. The authority in his voice had changed direction. For the first time, it was not at Danielle. Susan looked at Margaret. That single glance was enough. Thomas saw it. So did Danielle. He repeated. Susan extended the envelope. Margaret moved quickly. You have no right to open that. Thomas took it. If it belongs to you, I will return it. If it was given to a crew member during a passenger's dispute, I need to know why. Margaret's jaw tightened. The envelope was unsealed. Thomas lifted the flap. Inside was a handwritten card and several gift cards, a luxury department store. He removed them one at a time. The plastic edges clicked softly against each other. No one breathed. Susan stared at the floor. Margaret spoke first. They were a holiday gift. It is September, Michael said from behind Danielle. Margaret turned on him. I give gifts whenever I choose. Thomas looked at Susan. Did you accept these from Mrs. Whitmore today? Susan's mouth moved, but no words came out. Jason shifted away from her. The motion was small, almost instinctive. He no longer wanted to stand too close. Susan saw it. A flash of hurt crossed her face. Then fear replaced it. She gives them to staff sometimes, Susan said. It was not connected to the seat. Danielle's voice remained calm. When did she hand you the envelope? Susan looked at her. That is none of your concern. It became my concern when you tried to remove me from a seat that your own system confirmed belongs to me. Thomas held up the card. A message was written inside. Thank you for always taking care of me. I knew you would handle this. The words were simple. Their meaning was not. Thomas read them twice. Margaret's confidence began. She said, You are twisting something innocent, she said. Susan has assisted me for years. There is nothing improper about showing appreciation. Michael shook his head. Showing appreciation after the flight would already raise questions. Doing it during a dispute over another passenger's seat is worse. So top. We should call the supervisor. Thomas gave him a cold glance. You should have done that before Thressenger Snaltrima. Mouse is following Susan's lead. Susan's face went red. I was following Susan's lead. Susan turned to ask. Sisnotats suds and forks. You would fotsas and susan suses. The words came out with sudden force. Jason went silent. Danielle saw the structure around them beginning to collapse. Each person had been comfortable while responsibility was shared. Now that consequences were visible, they were pulling away from one another. That was another truth about unfairness. It often required cooperation. One person demanded, another excused, another enforced. And everyone told themselves their role was too small to matter. Thomas placed the gift cards back inside the envelope. Mrs. Whitmore, take your assigned seat. Margaret stared at him. Excuse me, seat 2C, across the aisle. Her face hardened. You are choosing her over me. I am following the boarding assignments. You should have done that 10 minutes ago, Helen said. Thomas heard her. His eyes lowered for a moment. The shame in his face was brief but real. Margaret did not move. I have contacts at Crestview. I can make this extremely difficult for all of you. Susan looked at her with disbelief. Only minutes earlier, Margaret had spoken as if they were allies. Now the threat included her too. Thomas stepped aside and pointed toward seat 2C. Take your seat, or you will be asked to leave the aircraft. The same words he had used against Danielle now faced the person who had created the conflict. This is discrimination. Michael almost laughed, but stopped himself. Danielle did not smile. There was nothing amusing about watching a person use the language of injustice to defend privilege. She looked at Margaret. No one is denying you the seat you paid for. Margaret turned toward her. You think you have won? Danielle's eyes stayed steady. This was never supposed to be a contest. For 1 second, Margaret had no answer. Then she grabbed her handbag and dropped into seat 2C. The movement was stiff and angry. She turned toward the aisle, refusing to look at Danielle. The cabin released a collective breath, but the conflict was not over. Thomas faced Susan. You will remain in the galley until a ground supervisor arrives. Susan looked stunned. Captain, we are already delayed. This is no longer about the delay. Her eyes filled with panic. I have worked for this airline for 23 years, and your words struck her hard. Susan toward Spant. Susan looked toward Danielle. For the first time, she did not see an obstacle. She saw a person. I did not intend for this to happen, she said quietly. Danielle felt the anger inside her slow, but it did not disappear. Intent matters, she replied. So does impact. Susan lowered her eyes as, I thought moving one passenger would calm everything down. You thought I would be easier to disappoint. Susan's face tightened with taunt. Danielle continued, softer now. The easiest person to pressure is often the person a system has already taught not to complain. That does not make the pressure harmless. Susan swallowed. I am sorry. Danielle studied her. The apology was not enough, not yet, but it was the first honest thing Susan had said. Before Danielle could respond, a gate supervisor through the cabin door. She wore a navy blazer and carried a tablet against her chest. What happened here? She asked. Thomas looked at the envelope in his hand, then at the phone still recording. His voice came out lower than before. We have a serious customer service and employee conduct issue. The supervisor glanced at Danielle's boarding pass, then at the name Danielle Brooks. Her eyes froze. She looked again. This time recognition flooded her face. Ms. Brooks, she said carefully, from Brooks Dynamics? The cabin went silent. Margaret slowly turned her head. Susan stared at Danielle. Jason's arms fell to his sides. Danielle remained beside seat 2A, calm and still. Yes, she said. Supervisor's face went pale. Our executive team has been trying to reach you. Danielle looked around the cabin, at the phones, at the envelope, at every person who had assumed she was powerless. Then she met the supervisor's eyes. I know. And in that moment, everyone understood that the woman they had tried to push into economy was not merely traveling to a business meeting. She was the reason the meeting existed. The gate supervisor stepped fully into the cabin and lowered her tablet. Her name badge read Karen Mitchells. She was in her early 50s, with short brown hair and the composed posture of someone used to solving problems before passengers noticed them, but now with every passenger on this Lotus. But I told you were Danielle again. I was told realize there was a seating issue, but I did not realize there was a seating issue. Danielle held her boarding pass at her side. There was no seating issue. Karen glanced at seat 2A, then at Margaret in seat 2C, then at the envelope in Cap Caldwell's hands. Her expression tightened. Captain, I need a clear explanation. Thomas looked toward the cockpit door. For the first time, he seemed to wish he could return behind it and close the world out. Mrs. Whitmore wanted the window seat, he said. The crew attempted to accommodate her. Karen's eyes moved to Danielle. By moving Ms. Brooks to economy? Thomas did not answer. Susan stood near the galley, hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles had turned white. Jason stayed several feet away from her. Suit. Margaret stared through the opposite window, pretending the conversation did not involve her. Karen took a slow breath. Mr. Brooks, I apologize. You should never have been asked to leave your assigned cabin suit. Danielle's apology sounded sincere. Danielle watched her carefully. It also came only after her identity had been recognized. That is part of the problem, Danielle said. You know who I am now, so the tone has changed. No one moved, Danielle continued. But my ticket was valid before you knew my title. My dignity was the same before anyone recognized my name. Karen lowered her eyes for a moment. You are right. The answer was quiet, immediate, no excuse. Danielle respected that. Not enough to erase what had happened, but enough to notice. Michael Foster spoke from behind her. The whole Karen looked at him, and several of us recorded it, Helen added. Karen's face became more serious. I understand, Margaret turned from the window. This has been blown completely out of proportion. Danielle looked at her. You demanded another passenger seat? I asked for an accommodation. Assigned seat? You refused. Your assigned site! Margaret's lips tightened. I am a premium customer. So am I. That is not what I meant. The words escaped before Margaret could stop them. The cabin went still. Her face changed as soon as she heard herself. Danielle felt a familiar ache rise inside her. Not surprise. She had stopped being surprised by words like those years ago. What hurt was how easily they came, how naturally one person could divide the world into those who deserved comfort, and those looked at Margaret. Karen looked at Margaret. What did you mean? Margaret gripped the strap of her handbag. I meant I have been loyal to this airline for years. That does not give you ownership of another passenger's seat. Margaret gave a bitter laugh. So now everyone is against me. Danielle shook her head. This is not about people being against you. It is about people no longer agreeing to place you above everyone else. Margaret stared at her. For a brief moment, the anger in her face gave way to something smaller. Fear. Not fear of Danielle, fear of losing the special treatment she had mistaken for respect. Captain Caldwell handed the envelope to Karen. She gave this to Susan during the dispute. Karen opened it and read the card. Her eyes moved across the gift cards inside. Susan spoke quickly. It was not a bribe. Karen looked at her. Did you accept it before asking Ms. Brooks to move? Susan swallowed. Yes. Did Mrs. Whitmore ask you to take care of the seating problem? Susan looked at Margaret. Margaret did not return the glance. Susan's shoulders dropped. Yes, Jason stared at the floor. Karen closed the envelope. Captain, this aircraft will not depart with the current crew configuration. Thomas looked stunned. What are you saying? I am saying Susan is being removed from duty pending investigation. Jason will also be interviewed before he is cleared to continue. Jason's head snapped up. I did not take anything. Karen turned toward him. You questioned how Miss Brooks obtained her ticket. You asked if she purchased it herself. You threatened to treat a seat dispute as a security matter after confirming her documents were valid. Jason's mouth opened. Nothing came out. Karen looked at Thomas. And you threatened removal without reviewing both boarding passes. Thomas's face hardened. I relied on my lead fleet attendant. You are the captain. The sentence was simple. It carried the full weight of his responsibility. Thomas looked toward Danielle. I made a mistake. Danielle met his eyes. You made several decisions. He absorbed the correction. Yes, he said. I did. The admission cost him something. Everyone should see it. Danielle's voice softened, but only slightly. Mistakes happen when information is incomplete. This continued after the facts became clear. Thomas nodded slowly. There was no defense left. Karen called the operations desk through her radio and requested a replacement lead attendant. Her voice remained professional, but the strain beneath it was visible. The delay was growing. Schedules would be affected, passengers would miss connections. Yet for once, no one blamed Danielle. The cause was visible now. It was not the woman who refused to surrender her rights. It was the people who had treated those rights as negotiable. Margaret stood abruptly. I will take another flight. Karen faced her. You airport free security may need a statement regarding the gift cards. Margaret froze. I have done nothing illegal. That will be reviewed by the airline's ethics office and legal department. Margaret looked around the cabin. No one offered sympathy. She lifted her handbag as she passed Danielle. She stopped. You could have avoided all of this by moving. Danielle looked at her with sadness rather than anger, and you could have avoided it by sitting 4 feet away. Margaret's face tightened. Danielle continued. You did not need the seat. You needed me to give it to you. The truth struck cleanly. Margaret looked away and walked toward the door. Her heels clicked against the floor. Sharp, fast. Then she disappeared into the jet bridge. Susan followed Karen off the aircraft a few minutes later. Before leaving, she stopped beside Danielle. Her eyes were wet. I spent years thinking good service meant keeping important customers happy. Danielle looked at her. Every customer is important when they are standing in front of you. Susan nodded. I forgot that. No, Danielle said gently. You decided it did not apply equally. Susan closed her eyes for a second. The words hurt because they were true. I am sorry. Danielle did not offer forgiveness, not yet, but she did not turn away. I hope you learn from this. Susan tooted again and stepped off the plane. Karen remained near the door. Ms. Brooks, the chairman has asked whether you would prefer to leave the flight and travel by company aircraft. Danielle looked at seat 2A, then at Helen, at Michael, at the passengers who had chosen not to remain silent. No, she said, I will stay. Karen seemed surprised. Danielle sat down and fastened her seatbelt. I paid for this seat. I intend to use it. A quiet sounds moved through the cabin. Not applause. Something more respectful. A collective breath. Karen nodded. We will get you there. Danielle looked through the window at the runway beyond the glass. The meeting ahead would now be about more than software, security, or money. It would be about what kind of company Crestview wanted to become. and whether its leaders understood that respect was not a benefit reserved for powerful people. It was the minimum every person deserved. The replacement crew arrived 20 minutes later, but the cabin never returned to normal. Passengers spoke in low voices. Phones glowed against the dimmed walls. The air vents whispered overhead, pushing cool air through a space that still felt charged. JL remained in seat 2A. Her briefcase rested beneath the window. The small piece of paper, all this where everyone could see it. The small piece of paper had become more than proof of travel. It was evidence of how quickly facts could be ignored when prejudice offered an easier explanation. A newbie, lead flighted approached. Your name was Linda Hayes, in her early C60s, with silver hair cut neatly at her jaw and who had spent decades handling difficult situations without losing her humanity. She stopped beside Danielle. Ms. Brooks, my name is Linda.
Leading crew for this flight.
Danielle looked up. Linda did not offer a polished corporate smile. She looked genuinely troubled. I was briefed on what happened. I am sorry you were treated that way. Danielle studied her face. Did they tell who I am? Linda paused. Yes. Would you still be apologizing if they had not? Linda held her gaze. I would like to believe I would. Danielle waited. Linda drew a quiet breath. But belief is easy when you are not the person being tested. So I will not ask you to trust my intentions. I will show you through my conduct. The answer surprised Danielle. It was not perfect. It was honest. That is a fair response, she said. Linda nodded and moved toward the front galley. Across the aisle, seat 2C remained empty. Margaret had not returned. Her absence did not bring relief. It left a visible space where entitlement had sat only minutes earlier. Every passenger who looked at that empty seat remembered how small the original request had been. 4 feet. That was all Margaret would have needed to move. Instead, she had tried to move another human being out of first class. Captain Caldwell returned to the cockpit after Karen Mitchell finished questioning him near the cabin door. Before leaving, he stopped with under one arm. Without it, he looked older. Less command. The deep lines around his eyes seemed heavier now. I need to say something before departure, he said. Danielle waited. I should have reviewed both boarding passes immediately. Yes. I should not have treated your request for an explanation as defiance. No, you should not have. Thomas glanced toward the passengers. Several were listening. He lowered his voice, but Danielle shook her head. Do not make the apology private if the treatment was public. Thomas looked at her. The truth of that landed slowly. He straightened and turned toward the cabin. My name is Captain Thomas Caldwell, he said. Before we depart, I owe Ms. Brooks and all of you an apology. The conversation stopped. Thomas kept both hands at his sides. A valid seating assignment was not respected. I made a decision before reviewing all available information. I also allowed a customer service dispute to be framed as a safety and compliance issue when it was not one. Jason stood near the galley entrance, listening with his face pale. Thomas continued. That was unfair, and it did not meet the standard passengers should expect from this crew. No one applauded. Danielle was glad. An apology was not a performance. It did not deserve celebration simply because it did not deserve diminish. Simply because someone had finally said what should have been obvious. Thomas looked directly at her.
Sorry, Miss Brooks.
Thank you for saying it clearly. It was not forgiveness, but it was acknowledgement. Sometimes healing began there. Thomas returned to the cockpit. Minutes later, the cabin door closed. The locking mechanism struck with a heavy metallic sound. The safety demonstration began. Seatbelts clicked into place. As the aircraft pushed away from the gate, Helen leaned across the aisle. Are you all right? Danielle looked at the elderly woman's phone, now resting face down on her lap. I am still deciding. Helen nodded as though she understood exactly. My husband used to say the body gets through something before the heart catches up. Danielle smiled faintly. He sounds like a wise man. He was stubborn. So was mine. The shared grief passed quietly between them. Danielle looked through the window as the terminal moved away. Her reflection floated across the glass. Calm face, straight shoulders, tired eyes. For more than an hour, she had refused to let anyone see how deeply the situation hurt. Now, with the conflict paused, the pain arrived. She remembered being 19 years old and walking into a department store with her mother. A security guard had followed them through every aisle. Her mother had noticed but said nothing until they reached the car. Then she had sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. Danielle had watched her hands tremble. That day, her mother had told her that dignity did not mean refusing to let the hurt teach you to hate yourself. It meant Danielle closed her eyes. She missed her mother. She missed her husband. She missed the version of herself that still believed success would one day make these moments stop. The plane turned toward the runway. Michael leaned forward from the row behind. "Ms. Brooks, I want you to know I will provide a witness statement." Danielle turned. "You do not have to, I know." That answer carried more weight than any promise. Helen lifted her phone. "I have the recording from the moment Susan first asked you to move." A younger passenger near the bulkhead spoke up. "I recorded the captain threatening to remove you." Another man raised his hand slightly. "I caught the envelope falling." Danielle looked around. These people had no business connection to her. No reason to impress her. Most had not known her name until the gate supervisor said it aloud. They had spoken because something was wrong. That mattered. "Please preserve the original files," Danielle said. "Do not edit them. Do not add captions. Context matters." Michael nodded. "I can help organize contact information for witnesses." Danielle took a breath. "Thank you." The aircraft accelerated. Buildings blurred beyond the window. The wheels struck seams in the runway, faster and faster, until the ground fell away. Danielle felt the pressure push her into the seat they had tried to take from her. Below, the airport became a grid of concrete and light. Her phone connected to the aircraft network several minutes later. Messages flooded the screen. The chairman of Crestview Airlines had called twice. Her chief legal officer had sent 4 urgent texts. Then a new notification appeared. A passenger video had been posted online. The caption read, "Crestview crew tries to remove black woman from her paid first-class seat." Danielle opened it. The view count climbed as she watched. Thousands. Then tens of thousands. Comments appeared faster than she could read them. Some expressed outrage. Some demanded names. Some questioned what had happened before the recording started. And some blamed Danielle without knowing anything beyond the color of her skin and the sound of her refusal. The public story had begun. It was moving faster than the airplane. Danielle locked the screen and stared ahead. The board meeting was no longer about whether Brooks Dynamics would modernize Crestview's technology. It was about whether technology could fix a company whose deepest failure was human. Software could track complaints. It could flag suspicious seat changes. It could preserve records. But no system could create integrity inside a person who chose convenience over fairness. That required leadership. That required consequences. And when Danielle walked into the boardroom, she intended to find out whether Crestview had either won. By the time the plane reached cruising altitude, the video had crossed 500,000 views. Danielle did not watch it again. She sat beside the window with her phone face down on the tray table. Outside, a white field of clouds stretched beneath the wing. Inside, the cabin lights had dimmed, but no one seemed relaxed. The story was spreading through news accounts, travel forums, and private group chats. People were naming the airline, tagging executives, demanding answers. Some comments defended Danielle. Others accused her of using her position to destroy ordinary workers. That part troubled her most. She had not revealed her position. She had not threatened anyone. Yet even now, strangers were rewriting her calm refusal into an act of revenge. Linda approached with a glass of water. Danielle accepted it. "Thank you." Danielle accepted it. "Thank you." Linda glanced toward the phone. "Public Relations has contacted the aircraft." Danielle looked up. "What do they want?" They asked the captain to request that passengers avoid posting additional footage until the airline completes a review. Michael heard from behind her. "That request will not go over well." Linda nodded. "I said the same thing." Danielle studied her. "You refused?" "I told them I would not pressure passengers into protecting the company from the consequences of what they witnessed." There was no drama in Linda's voice, only certainty. Danielle took a sip of water. That was the right decision. Linda gave a tired smile. "I wish the right decisions had been made before I boarded." She continued toward the galley. Danielle watched her go. That was the difference between protecting an organization and serving it. Protection hid the damage. Service forced the organization to face it. Her phone vibrated again. This time, the message came from Nathan Cole, the chief legal officer of Brooks Dynamics. The chief make public statements yet. Preserve all records. The board is in emergency session. A second message followed. Crestview wants to postpone today's contract vote. Danielle read the words twice. The contract vote had been scheduled for months. Lawyers had reviewed thousands of pages. Engineers had completed security tests. Implementation teams were already waiting. Postponing the vote would cost both companies time and money. It would also give Crestview room to control the story. Danielle typed a response. Do not agree to postponement. I will attend as scheduled. Nathan replied almost immediately. Understood. Are you certain? Danielle looked at the empty seat across the aisle. Yes. She was certain. The aircraft landed in Chicago shortly after noon. Rain streaked across the windway. The impact shook the cabin. Engines roared. Passengers leaned forward against their seatbelts as the plane slowed. No one rushed to stand when the seatbelt sign turned off. The usual scramble for overhead bags did not happen. Instead, several passengers remained seated, watching Danielle. Michael approached first. He handed her a business card with his phone number written on the back. I have already saved the original recording and written down the time of each event. Danielle accepted the card. You did not have to do all that. Michael adjusted his glasses. My generation spent too many years watching unfair things happen and calling silence neutrality. His voice softened. It never was. Danielle looked at him. Thank you. Helen stepped into the aisle next. She held her phone carefully in both hands. My daughter helped me upload a copy to secure storage. I do not understand half of what she explained, but she said no one can delete it from my phone and make it disappear. A small smile touched Danielle's face. Your daughter gave you good advice. Helen reached out and placed a hand over Danielle's fingers. You reminded me of my husband today. Danielle felt her throat tighten. I hope that is a compliment. The highest one I have. For a moment, the noise of the aircraft faded. Danielle, the grief in Helen's eyes. The same quiet grief she carried herself, 2 women lives connected by the people they had lost and the values those people had left behind. Danielle squeezed her hand. Then I will try to deserve it. The aircraft door opened. Cold air moved into the cabin from the jet bridge. Karen Mitchell stood outside with 2 airline executives and a member of airport operations. Their formal clothing and tense expressions made it clear that the situation had traveled faster than the plane. The first executive stepped forward. He was a narrow-faced man in his late 50s with a dark suit and a Crestview pin on his lapel. Ms. Brooks, I am Edward Lane, Senior Vice President of Customer Operations. Danielle stepped into the jet bridge. I know who you are. Edward's expression shifted. Of course she did. His department was responsible for passenger experience. His signature appeared several sections of the contract awaiting approval. We would like to escort you to a private conference room, he said. Why? To discuss what happened without further disruption. Danielle glanced past him. At the end of the jet's sip, several airport employees were watching. Beyond the glass doors, phones were already raised. This is not a private matter anymore. Edward lowered his voice. We are concerned about inaccurate information spreading online. Danielle stopped walking. What information is inaccurate? He hesitated. We do not yet have the full context. The full context was recorded by multiple passengers. We need time to investigate. You need time to prepare a response. His face tightened. Rain struck the windows beside them. The sharp tapping filled the silence. Edward tried again. We are prepared to offer you compensation for the inconvenience. Danielle looked at him. What amount of money do you believe makes this acceptable? That is not what I meant. It is exactly what you meant. The second executive, a woman named Rebecca Shaw, stepped forward. She was Crestview's general counsel and had negotiated with Danielle's team for nearly a year. Rebecca said quietly, we are not asking you to forget what happened. Then do not begin with compensation. Rebecca absorbed the rebuke. You are right. Edward looked at her, displeased. Rebecca ignored him. The board is waiting at headquarters. The chairman wants to hear directly from you. Danielle adjusted the strap of her briefcase. He will. Edward forced a professional smile. We have a car ready. Danielle began walking. At the end of the jet bridge, a young airline employee stood near the wall. She wore a customer service badge and held a radio against her chest. Her eyes met Danielle's for only a second. "I am sorry," the young woman whispered. Danielle stopped. "You did not do this." "No, but I have seen things like it before. Smaller things. I never said anything." Danielle looked at her carefully. "What is your name?" "Rachel." Danielle nodded. "Rachel, guilt is only useful if it changes what you do next." The young woman lowered the radio. "What should I do?" "Tell the truth when someone asks, and when no one asks, find a safe way to document the pattern." Rachel took a shaky breath. "I will." Danielle continued toward the terminal. Behind her, Edward was already speaking into his phone. Rebecca walked in silence. Karen remained near the aircraft door, watching with a face that carried both relief and fear. Ahead, the boardroom waited, the contract waited, the company's future waited. But Danielle understood something the executives around her had not yet accepted. They were no longer deciding whether Brooks Dynamics was good enough for Crestview. She was deciding whether Crestview was worthy of being trusted with millions of passengers. And this time, no one could ask her to move aside. The black sedan moved through downtown Chicago beneath a sky the color of steel. Rain slid across the windows in long silver lines. Danielle sat in the back seat with her briefcase beside her, and her phone resting in her palm. The video had passed 2 million views. News stations were calling it a developing story. Crestview Airlines had released a short statement promising a full review. The statement did not mention Danielle by name. It did not explain why a passenger with a valid first-class ticket had been pressured to move. It used careful phrases like misunderstanding and service concern, words designed to sound responsible without admitting responsibility. Rebecca Shaw sat across from Danielle, reading the statement on her tablet. Her face grew tighter with every line. "I did not approve this," she said. Edward Lane looked up from his phone. Public relations needed to respond quickly, but they responded without facts. They responded to control the situation. Danielle looked out at the wet streets. "You cannot control a situation by denying its shape." Edward leaned forward. "No one is denying what happened." Danielle turned toward him. "Your statement calls it a misunderstanding." Edward paused. Rebecca lowered the tablet. "She is right." The car became quiet. Edward looked from one woman to the other. "We have voice to remain competent. Kratimit cloyet." "She, you have employees to treat fairplay. That includes investigating before discipline. It does not include hiding their conduct from the public." Edward rubbed his jaw. "The internet has already decided they are guilty. The internet saw what they did. It did not see every moment. Then release the full timeline when you have verified it." Edward looked toward the window. He had spent years climbing inside Crestview. He knew how quickly companies turned against executives who became associated for Susan and Jason. Part of Haim feared for Susan and Jason. A larger part feared becoming the next name in the headlines. Danielle could see both fears. She did not enjoy that. Accountability was necessary, humiliation was not. When the sedan reached Crestview headquarters, security officers were waiting beneath the covered entrance. Reporters stood beyond the barriers in the rain, holding microphones and shouting questions. "Ms. Brooks, will you cancel the contract? Do you believe this was racial discrimination? Should the crew be fired?" Edward opened his door first. "We should use the private entrance." Danielle remained seated. "No." Rebecca looked at her. "Danielle, you do not owe the press a statement. I know." Camera shutters exploded. The sound was sharp and relentless. Danielle stood beneath the awning, composed but visibly of her tired. Water blew against the shoulders of her phones. She did not approach the microphones. She simply raised one hand. "It's not about one seat," she said. "What happened today was not about one seat," she said. "It was about whether a person's rights can be treated as optional when someone else appears more important." The reporters leaned closer. Danielle continued. "I will not discuss individual employment decisions before a fair investigation. I will not encourage harassment of the employees involved. But I will ask Crestview Airlines to examine confirmed facts why a customer service request became a security threat, and why respect arrived only after my professional identity became known." A reporter called out. "Was race a factor?" Danielle held his gaze. I cannot tell you what was inside every person's mind. I can tell you that bias often appears through patterns, not confessions. Who gets questioned? Who gets believed? Who is expected to move? Those patterns must be examined honestly. She turned toward the doors. No dramatic threat, no announcement about the contract, only the truth. Inside the lobby, employees stood frozen near the security desks. Some looked away. Others watched her with open concern. One older janitor placed a hand over his heart as Danielle passed. She nodded to him. The boardroom occupied the top floor. When the elevator doors opened, the chairman was waiting. Richard Langston was 63, tall and white-haired, with a heavy frame and a reputation for direct decisions. He had met Danielle many times during the contract negotiations, but he always ashamed. Danielle, he said. Today, he looked his hand, then stopped. He extended his hand, then a handshake felt too formal. An embrace would have been too familiar. He lowered his arm. I am sorry, Danielle studied him, for what happened or for what it may cost the company. The question struck him. He did not defend himself. Both, he said, and I am ashamed. The second concern entered my mind so quickly. Danielle gave a small nod. Honesty did not erase failure, but it created somewhere to begin. Richard led her into the boardroom. 12 directors sat around a long walnut table. Their phones had been placed face down. A large screen displayed the paused image of standing at seat 2. While Captain Caldwell faced her in the aisle, no one spoke. She entered. Danielle placed her briefcase on the table but remained standing. I understand you want to discuss the contract, she said. Richard took his seat, general counsel's position. Rebecca sat near the general counsel's position. Edward remained near the door. Danielle looked around the room, then began with the passenger record. A technology officer opened a file on the screen. Danielle Brooks, confirmed first class. Seat 2A, Margaret Whitmore, confirmed first class. Seat 2C, no duplicate assignment, no system failure, no medical seating requirement. The facts appeared in clean black text, simple, undeniable. Richard looked at Edward. When did the crew confirm this? Before the captain arrived. A director named Charles Monroe leaned back. Then why was Ms. Brooks still threatened with removal? Edward's mouth tightened. That is under review. Danielle opened her briefcase. I can help with the review. She placed Michael's written timeline on the table. Then Helen's contact details. Then a list of passengers who had agreed to provide original recordings. Rebecca looked at the documents. You collected all of this during the flight? The passengers did. Danielle turned toward the board. They spoke because your process failed in real time. The screen began playing the first video. Susan asked Danielle to move. Jason questioned whether she had purchased her own ticket. Thomas threatened removal. Then the envelope fell. The boardroom filled with the sound of the cabin, the hum of the aircraft, Margaret's voice. Danielle's controlled replies, no music, no commentary, only evidence. When the recording ended, no one moved. Richard removed his glasses. Danielle looked down the table. Brooks Dynamics was hired to modernize your passenger systems. We can improve documentation. We can create automatic alerts when an assigned seat is changed without consent. We can preserve crew decisions and complaint records. Sheet software can't not repair a culture that rewards silence. Charles leaned forward. Are you terminating negotiations? Danielle looked at him. I am suspending approval. The words that Thursday took a step forward. This agreement is worth hundreds of millions of dollars. Danielle faced him. That is why I will not sign it, while I have reason to doubt the integrity of the company using it. Richard's voice was low. What would it take to continue? Danielle looked at the paused image on the screen. An independent investigation. Protection for employee witnesses. Public reporting of the findings. Revised de-escalation training. A clear rule that customer status does not override assigned rights. And a complaint system that cannot be buried by local managers. The directors exchanged looks. One woman near the far end spoke. That could expose us to significant liability. Danielle turned toward her. The conduct already created the liability. Transparency only reveals whether you intend to correct it. Silence returned. Richard looked around the table. Then he closed the contract folder in front of him. We will do it. Edward stared at him. Richard, we need to discuss the financial impact. Richard's eyes remained on Danielle. The financial impact began when our employees decided one passenger's dignity was cheaper than another passenger's comfort. No one challenged him. Danielle sat down at last. Her hands were steady, but deep inside, the weight of the day pressed against her. She had won nothing yet. A delayed contract would not heal the humiliation. An investigation would not erase the moment she had been asked whether she bought her own ticket. But the room was listening now, not because she was loud, because she had refused to disappear. And for the first time that day, the people with the power to change the system understood that silence was no longer an option. The investigation lasted 6 weeks. Crestview hired an outside law firm to review the passenger records, crew reports, radio calls, security footage, and every original video submitted by witnesses. More than 30 employees were interviewed. 4 passengers were invited to report similar experiences. For the first time, complaints that had once been treated as isolated misunderstandings were placed side by side. A pattern appeared. Passengers with elite status had received exceptions. Passengers who questioned those exceptions had been described as difficult. Black travelers had been asked for additional proof more often than other passengers in comparable situations. The company could no longer call what happened to Danielle a single mistake. It was a culture that had learned to hide unfairness behind polite language. The final report was presented in the same boardroom where Danielle had suspended the contract. Rain tapped against the tall windows again, softer this time. The long walnut table was covered with printed findings. No one reached for coffee. Richard Langston sat at the head of the table. Danielle sat across from him. Susan Miller had been terminated for accepting gifts from a passenger during an active dispute and for providing false information during the initial review. Jason Reed was also dismissed after investigators confirmed that he had repeatedly questioned passengers from minority backgrounds more aggressively than others. Captain Thomas Caldwell was removed from flight duty during the investigation. He accepted responsibility before the final hearing and chose to resign rather than challenge the findings. Margaret Whitmore was banned from Crestview flights for 5 years. The airline also referred the gift card matter to its ethics and legal teams. No criminal charges were filed, but the evidence remained part of the company record. Richard closed the report. "We failed you," he said. Danielle looked at him. "You failed more people than me," he nodded. Yes, there was no defensive language now. No misunderstanding, no inconvenience, only failure. Rebecca Shaw slid another document across the table. It contained the reforms Crestview had approved. Seat assignments could no longer be changed during boarding without the consent of the assigned passenger, except for documented safety, accessibility, or operational needs. Any proposed downgrade required written authorization from a ground supervisor. Crew members had to record the exact reason for a passenger removal request. The new system would flag patterns involving race, age, disability, and customer status for independent review. Gift policies had been tightened. Witnesses would be protected. Complaints could no longer be closed by the same local manager whose team was involved. Danielle read every page. The room waited. Edward Lane was no longer Senior Vice President of Customer Operations. The board had reassigned him after finding that his department repeatedly prioritized reputation management over early truth gathering. Karen Mitchell had been promoted into a new passenger fairness role. Linda Hayes had helped design the new crew training program. Rachel Kim, the young employee who had admitted seeing smaller incidents before, had provided investigators with years of internal complaints. Her courage changed the scope of the review. Danielle looked up from the documents. What happens when the public attention fades? Richard folded his hands. The independent review continues for 3 years. Quarterly results will be published. Brooks Dynamics will have audit access if the contract proceeds. One director shifted in her chair. That is more oversight than we have ever allowed an outside partner. Danielle met her eyes. That is because trust is not restored by promising to be better. The director nodded slowly. It is restored by being willing to be checked. Yes. The room fell silent. The suspended contract rested in front of Danielle. Hundreds of millions of dollars, thousands of jobs, years of work. She could have canceled it. No one in the room doubted that. Her power was real now. Visible, heavy, But Danielle had never wanted revenge. She wanted change that would outlast the headlines. She picked up the pen. Richard watched her closely. "I will authorize the contract," she said, "under the revised terms." A quiet breath moved around the table. Danielle did not sign yet. Brooks Dynamics will build the system. But Crestview must continue the human work. Technology can show you where people are being treated unfairly. It cannot make you care. Richard's eyes lowered. "That part belongs to us." Danielle signed. The pen moved once across the page, simple, final. The contract did not represent forgiveness. It represented accountability with conditions. Months later, Danielle returned to Crestview for the first public release of the Passenger Fairness Report. The airport looked the same. Bright floors, rolling suitcases, boarding announcements echoing beneath the high ceiling. But some things had changed. A digital screen near the gate explained passenger seating rights in plain language. Crew members completed conflict reviews before each shift. Supervisors were trained to separate real safety concerns from discomfort, status, and bias. The changes were not perfect. No honest reform ever was, but they were measurable. Danielle boarded a late afternoon flight to Washington. Her seat was 2A. Linda Hayes was working the cabin. She welcomed Danielle without ceremony. "Good afternoon, Ms. Brooks." "Good afternoon, Linda." No special escort, no announcement, no nervous executive waiting at the door. Danielle placed her coat overhead and sat by the window. Across the aisle, an older white woman struggled to lift a small suitcase. A young black flight attendant stepped forward and helped her gently. "Take your time," he said. "There is no rush." The woman thanked him. Danielle watched the exchange and smiled. Respect was often quiet. It did not always arrive through speeches or public victories. Sometimes it was a patient hand beneath a suitcase, a question allowed to remain where they belonged. A person allowed to remain where they belonged. Helen Mercer had sent Danielle a letter after the investigation. In it, she wrote that her husband would have been proud. Michael Foster had volunteered to advise the independent passenger panel. Rachel Kim now led a confidential reporting program for frontline employees. Even Thomas Caldwell had written to Danielle. He did not ask for forgiveness. He said he had begun speaking at aviation safety seminars about the danger of confusing authority with certainty. Danielle kept the letter. Not because it erased what he had done, because change mattered when it was real. As the plane pushed away from the gate, sunlight broke through the clouds and spilled across the wing. Danielle looked at her reflection in the glass. The woman staring back at her was still the same woman who had been questioned, doubted, and told to move. Her title had not created her dignity. Her money had not created it. Her power had only forced others to recognize what had always been there. The engines rose. The aircraft turned toward the runway. Danielle rested her hand on the armrest and closed her eyes for one quiet moment. She thought of her mother sitting behind the wheel all those years ago, hands trembling after being followed through a store. Dignity does not mean pretending it does not hurt. It means refusing to let the hurt teach you to hate yourself. Danielle finally understood the rest of that lesson. Sometimes dignity also meant refusing to let the hurt stop with you. The plane lifted into the light, and seat 2A remained exactly where it belonged. If this story reminded you of a moment when someone was judged before being heard, share your thoughts. And remember, fairness does not begin when powerful people enter the room. It begins with how we treat the person we believe has no power at all.